ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते नारायणाय। ॐ नमो भगवते नारायणाय। शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। अनन्तसंसारसमुद्रतार नौकायिताभ्यां गुरुभक्तिदाभ्यां वैराग्यसाम्राज्यदपूजनाभ्यां नमो नमः श्री गुरुपादुकाभ्याम्। अञ्जनानन्दनं वीरं जानकी शोकनाशनं कपीशमक्षहन्तारं वन्दे लङ्काभयङ्करं। कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकी नन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः। यदङ्घ्रिपङ्केरुगरेणुलग्नं निपीयनीरं विमलन्तरङ्गः जानामि तत्त्वं निजमात्मरूपम्। जानामि तत्त्वं निजमात्मरूपम्। तं नौमि नारायणतीर्थमार्यम्। तं नौमि नारायणतीर्थमार्यम्। Namaskaram. Welcome to the 43rd session of Krishna Leela TarangiNi, which continues with gopis searching for their dear Krishna, drawn by his magical flute. The gopis did benediction to Katyayani Devi first and worshipped the Sharad Rutu, or the season, as goddess Sharada, and also as Shankara to bless them. We heard in that process the song Shanke Shankaram Sarada Samayam. Tirtha used the expression Samudita Govinda Krita Bahu Sangam, Sadashiva coexisting with Govinda, thus making the gopis pray to Shankara to merge with the evasive Govinda. We will now proceed with Slokam 142 of Tirtha explaining how the gopis start searching all over. इति प्रलपति व्रजे शरदि गोपिका मण्डले इति प्रलपति व्रजे शरदि गोपिका मण्डले गोपिका मण्डले Sudhakiranamandale Sudhakiranamandale Parihritandakare Nishi Parihritandakare Andakare Nishi Pratpravanamanasagha Sakalu Krishna Sara Sputam Murari Murali Ravaha Murari Murari Murali Ravaha Murari Murali Ravaha Samudita Samakarshati. As the gopis of Vraja were conversing to one another, the moon was dissipating the darkness of the night. The sound of the flute played by Murari drew all of them towards the flute and where the sound was coming. And to everyone, every listener, the minds were turned to external happenings and to whom Krishna was of the essence of their existence. In the verse, Narana Tirtha says that the sound emanating from Krishna's flute carried the gopis immersed in the routine and in samsara to Krishna. The dictates of the Vedanta are that one who desires liberation or moksha should first abstain from not only the activities resulting in material pleasure such as wealth and enjoyment of any kind, but also accumulation of virtue as narrated in the 29th chapter of Dasamaskandam. When the gopis heard the flute's sound, the impulses of Manmata were violently aroused within them, and they immediately abandoned all their household duties and hastily went to Krishna. All the gopis had purely spiritual bodies, but when some of the gopis' husbands and other family members stopped the young girls from going away from home, Bhagavan Krishna arranged for them to temporarily exhibit material bodies, which they then left at the sides of their husbands, mothers, and children, etc. Thereby, no one would even notice their absence. In this way, the gopis were able to deceive their relatives and went off to meet Krishna. Shri Parikshit Maharaja was either troubled or wanted to raise this question for future generations to understand the purpose behind the whole Rasa Leela. Parikshit raises the question in Slokam 12 of 29th chapter. Krishnam viduhu param kantam natu brahmataya mune gunapravaho aparamastasam gunadiyam katham. O Sukamani, the gopis knew Krishna only as their paramour, not as the supreme absolute truth. So how could these girls, with their minds completely caught up in the ways of the modes of material nature, free themselves from such material desires or attachment to catch on to Brahman? This was Parikshit's question. Further, Shuka says, O Maharaja, this point was already explained to you previously, but I will do it again. Since even Shishupala, who hated Krishna, achieved perfection and renunciation, then what to speak of the Lord's dearest of devotees, namely the gopis and gopikas? Although the spiritual nature of the conditioned souls may be covered by Maya or illusion like what we are witnessing now, Bhagavan Krishna is omnipotent and his power is never covered by any other influence. In fact, all other powers are his energy and thus function according to his will. The Brahma Samhita says in chapter 5, Srishti Sthiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Hi Eka Chayeva yasya bhuvanani vibharti durga ichchanurupamapi yasya cha cheshtate sa govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. The mighty Durga who creates, maintains and annihilates the material worlds is the energy manifestation of the Supreme Brahman, and she moves like a shadow according to his desire. Thus, because the Lord's spiritual influence does not depend on whether someone understands him or not, the gopis' spontaneous love for Bhagavan Krishna guaranteed their spiritual perfection. The great Madhvacharya explained this phenomenon by many passages from the Skanda Purana, from Canto 2, Chapter 9, designed Vasudeva Mahatmya. I will read out those passages from Skanda Purana and then explain. Krishna kamas tada gopyaha tyaktva deham divam gataha samyak krishnam parabrahma jnanatva kalat param yuyuhu. At that time, the gopis who desired Krishna immensely gave up their bodies and went to the spiritual world. Because they properly understood Krishna to be the supreme absolute truth, they were able to transcend the influence of time. Purvam cha jnana samyuktas tatrapi prayasas tataha atastasam param brahma gatihi asin na kamataha. In their previous lives, most of the gopis were already fully endowed with transcendental knowledge. It is because of this great knowledge that they had already acquired, not their lust, that they were able to attain the Supreme Brahman so easily. Natu jnanam rute moksho nanyaha pantetihi shruti kama yukta Shutihi kama yukta tada bhaktir jnanam chato vimuktigaha. The Vedas declare that without spiritual knowledge, there is no valid path to liberation. Because these amorous gopis possess devotion and knowledge, especially devotion to the core, they achieved liberation. Ato mokshopi tasam cha kamo bhaktya anuvartate Mukti Shabdodito Chaidya Prabhutao Dvesha Bhaginaha. Thus, even in the attainment of liberation, lust followed as a manifestation of their pure devotion or Shuddha Bhakti. After all, what we call liberation was experienced even by vengeful people like Shishubala, who had only hatred for Krishna. So the methods are different, but ultimately total concentration on Brahman gives you what exactly you desire. Bhakti Margo Prutan Muktim Agat Vishnu Prasadaha Kamastu TV Ashubha Krichabi Bhaktya Vishnu Prasada Kritu. By the mercy of Bhagavan Vishnu, one who follows the path of devotional service gains absolute liberation as a byproduct, and such a person's lusty desire, which would normally invoke misfortune, instead invokes the mercy of Bhagavan Vishnu when exhibited in Shuddha Bhakti or pure devotion. Dveshi jiva yutam chapi bhaktam Vishnuhu vimochayet ahoti karuna Vishnoho shishupalasya mokshanat. Bhagavan Vishnu will save even a devotee nursing absolute vengeance and hate. Just see the extreme mercy of Bhagavan, compassion, as shown by his granting liberation to Shishupala. All these slokas which I just read out are from Skanda Purana. Shishupala was Bhagavan Krishna's cousin. He was mortified when Krishna stole the gorgeous young Rukmini, whom Shishupala himself was hell-bent on marrying for the longest time. For various other reasons, as well as from his childhood, Shishupala was consumed with envy of Bhagavan Krishna, And finally, he insanely offended Krishna in a great Sabha or assembly at the Rajasuya sacrifice. At that time, Krishna nonchalantly cut off Shishupala's head and gave him liberation. Everyone present saw the effulgent soul of Shishupala rise out of his dead body and merge into existence of Bhagavan. The seventh canto explains that Shishupala was the third incarnation of Vishnu's gatekeeper in the spiritual world, but cursed to take birth on the earth as a demon. Since even Shishupala was liberated by Krishna or Bhagavan, who took into consideration the whole situation, then what else to speak of the gopis who loved Krishna so intimately and more than anybody else in creation? Through Slokam 15 of the same chapter, Sukabrahmam answers King Parikshit's question about the gopis. Sukha says, Kamam krodam bayam sneham aikyam sauhridamevacha nityam harau vidadato yanti tanmayatam hi te. Persons who constantly direct their lust, anger, fear, protective affection, feeling of impersonal oneness or friendship toward Bhagavan Hari are sure to become absorbed in thought of him and him only. Sukha had begun to narrate Krishna's most intimate Leela, the Rasa dance, and Parikshit is helping, if not cooperating, to remove the doubts of all others, then and henceforth to come. Whoever was or is hearing, or who in the future may hear this astonishing Leela or story. Therefore, Sri Madhvacharya decided to expand and explain that Bhagavata Slokam with the help of the Skanda Purana, which emphatically declared that persons like the gopis are liberated souls beyond the pale of material illusion, and thereby people should not misunderstand the concept. Bhaktyahi nityakamitvam natu muktim vina bhavet ataha kamitaya vapi muktihi bhaktimatam harav. This is Skanda Puranam, 2nd canto, 9th chapter. Eternal conjugal attraction to Krishna, expressed in pure bhakti or devotional service, cannot develop in one who is not already liberated. Thus, those who are devoted to Lord Hari, even in that kind of a conjugal attraction, are already liberated. That is Skanda Puranam defining it. Sri Madhvacharya continues his explanation through quotes from the Padma Purana to clarify the essential point that one cannot be liberated simply by showing lust towards Krishna or by kamam of Krishna, but only by possessing the attraction in pure devotional service. Their prema should be in absolute devotional service. Sneha bhaktaha sada devaha kamit sena apsarastriyaha kaschit kachin na kamena bhaktya kevalayayavatu. This is Padma Purana. The demigods are always affectionately devoted to Bhagavan, and the young ladies of heaven called Apsaras have lusty feelings toward Bhagavan, although some of them have pure devotion for him, untainted by material lust. Only these later Apsaras are ready for liberation because without bona fide devotional service, one cannot achieve liberation. That's what Padma Purana says. And that's what Madhvacharya used to explain that. Thus, bhakti is not yogyam or appropriate unless such bhakti is free from material lust. One should not take cheaply the gopis' achievement of personal association with Bhagavan Krishna as though it was only just for conjugal relationship. To show the gravity of direct relationship with Bhagavan, Sri Madhvacharya quotes some more verses from Varaha Purana. The goddess Lakshmi worships Bhagavan Janardana as her husband, and Brahma worships him as his own father, and all of the demigods worship him as their grandfather, because they actually came out of Brahma's vision and creation. Pratitamahomi Bhagavan iti sarva janasya tu guruhu Shri Brahmano Vishnuhu Suranam cha Guror Guruhu. Thus, people in general should think the Supreme Lord is my great-great-grandfather. Lord Vishnu is the spiritual master of Brahma and thus the guru of the demigods. Guru Brahmasya Jagato Daivam Vishnuhu Sanatanaha Ityevopasanam Karyam Nanyatatu Katanchana. Brahma is the spiritual master of this universe. Vishnu is the eternally worshipable deity. With this kind of understanding and not otherwise, one should worship Bhagavan or Brahman. The above injunctions apply to Sarvajnana, that means all people in general. Thus, one should follow these injunctions until one achieves the exalted platform of intimate relationship with Bhagavan. There is abundant evidence that the gopis of Brindavana were highly elevated, liberated souls, and thus their Leela with Krishna are pure, nothing but spiritual affair. Keeping this in mind, we can understand this aspect of the Leela and also Srimad Bhagavatam in full. Let us now listen to Slokam 143 and Geetam 52, when one gopi is calling the others to follow her in search of Krishna, but praising the great Brindavanam, which always accommodates and houses Sri Krishna as the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
Kapi, 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 Kapi Gopi Param Kantam Kamachara Palodayam Gantuka Metara Gopi Gopistavara Yanti Damagatu Brindavanam Aduna Manye Brindavanam Aduna Manye Brindavanam Aduna Manye Saki Brindavanam Aduna Manye Saki Brihadaranyamagam Saki Brindavanam Aduna Manye Saki Brihadaranyamagam Saki Brindavanam Aduna Manye Saki Brihadaranyamagam. Sundaratara Vamshanada Sanchuchita Sundaratara Vamshanada Sanchuchita Swananda Bodhamrita Maya Purusho Brindavanam Aduna Manye Brindavanam Aduna Unnata Shakagram Sadananda Nirnaya Rasapura Palabharam Punyavatam Atiramaniyam Amarendra Varnita Bhumapadam Bhavaparo Brindavanam Aduna मन्ये सखि बृहदारण्यमगम् मुनिवर परिसेवितं मोघविराम मूलम् अशेष विशेषास्पदम् अनिकेत निकेतनम् अखिल शोकहरम् अनिकेत निकेतनम् अखिल शोकहरम् अनुदयलय पर तर सिद्धफलतो बृन्दावनम् अधुना मन्ये सखि बृन्दावनम् अधुना सकृदितम् अवलोकितं सम्यगिह स्वसुतकळद्रादि गणविरसं स्वसुतकळद्रादि धनविरसं प्रकटयति परम हंस समकुल प्रकटयति परम हंस समाकुलम् अमलमानस वृत्ति विलसित सरसो वृन्दावनम् अधुना मन्ये सखि बृहदारण्यमगम् परिहृत रिपुवर्गम् परमयोगी परिपूर्ण भाव विशेषोदयम् परिहृत रिपुवर्गम् परमयोगी परिपूर्ण भाव विशेषोदयम् हरिपरभावनया गोपिका गीतम् हरिपरभावनया गोपिका गीतमिति भणितं नारायण तीर्थयतिना हरिपरभावनया गोपिका गीतमिति भणितं नारायण तीर्थयतिना वृन्दावन दुना मन्ये वृन्दावनम् अधुना मन्ये सखि बृहदारण्यमगम् सखि वृन्दावनम् अधुना 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 सखि सखि
Why did Narayana Tirtha take so much effort to make a Gopika sing the praise of Brindavanam and Brihadaranyaka in one breath and comparing them in greatness? Sundaratara Vamsanada Samsujita Swananda Bodha Amritamaya Purusham. That's what Narayana Tirtha said in the song. Oh my friend, I consider Brindavana to be the Upanishad of Brihadaranyaka, which is fully associated with Krishna. This Brindavana is the bliss known by the flute of Krishna, the image of pure knowledge and bliss, the eternal immortality. Brihadaranyaka is part of the glorious Paramatman, since it resides in the body of the great yogis who were skilled in controlling all desires and their mind, whose hearts are filled with knowledge and bliss, such as the sounds of nada. What are the sounds of nada? Para, Pashyanti, and Madhyama. What did Tirtha mean by that? And why did he insert it in the context of the uninitiated gopis running for Krishna and making them compare the sacred Brindavanam to Brihadaranyaka? A short dip unto Rigveda and then to Uddhava Gita might help assuage this query and the need for this kind of a digression. Chatvari vak parimita padani tani Vidur Brahmanaye Manishinaha. Tani Viduhu Brahmanaye Manishinaha. Guha Trini Nihita Nengayanti. Turiyam Vacho Manushya Vadanti. This is Rigveda Vakyam are the definite grades of speech. Those Brahmanas who relentlessly pursued and pursue Brahman, and all the wise men know about them. 3 of them are deposited in secret, indicate no meaning, and men speak the 4th grade or the 4th nature of sound as speech. There was a great scholar who was an English Orientalist by name Horace Hayman Wilson. He had written a lot of books and treatises on spirituality, focusing on Sanatana Dharma for almost like 60 years, from when he was a teenager. Wilson lived between 1786 and 1860, and he happened to be the first elected Bowden Professor of Sanskrit at Oxford University. So he was known as H.H. Wilson, not His Highness, but Horace Hayman Wilson. He wrote a simplistic commentary on Rigveda, and I quote from his explanation of that sloka, Chatvari Vak Parimita Padani Tani Vidur Brahmanaye Manishinaha. Wilson said, Para Pashyanti Madhyama and Vaikari. Para Pashyanti Madhyama and Vaikari are the 4 successive phases from which sounds pass through before we can hear them or sound becomes even audible. These are 4 successive stages of transformations of sound as well. By these 4 phases, we can learn about the origination of a sound or utterance of a word from the mouth. In Sanskrit, these are called Vani or Vak. Among these, the first 3 are hidden inside our body, but one can experience the 4th, namely Vaikari. So we talked about Parapashyanti and Madhyama, but the one which can be experienced clearly is Vaikari, or the 4th phase of speech. Let us take a quick look at what they say. Para is eternal. Pashyanti is felt by a sage or a person in his deep consciousness. Madhyama is when it translates as an idea in the intellect. Vaikari is when the Vani is actually verbally expressed through the mouth, the communicated spoken language. The successive phases of these are explained in Srimad Bhagavata Puranam as follows. Bhagavan himself says this, Sayesha Jivo Vivara Prasudihi Pranena Goshena Guham Pravishtaha Manomayam Sukshma Mupetya Rupam Matraswaro Varnayiti Stavishtaha. This comes after the Dasamaskandam. In the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 12th chapter, this slokam comes. Bhagavan Krishna says in that slokam, my dear Uddhava, you might have guessed it's Uddhava Gita's intro. Krishna says to Uddhava, my dear Uddhava, the Supreme Brahman gives life to every living being and is situated within the heart along with prana or the life air and primal sound vibration. The ultimate Brahman can be perceived in a subtle form within the heart by one's mind. Since the Lord controls the minds of everyone, even great gods and demigods, their hearts are controlled by Brahman only. The Brahman also assumes a gross form as the various sounds of the Vedas that are composed of short and long vowels and consonants of different intonations. Of course, we will get a brief opportunity to talk about Uddhava later in this opera, but it is relevant to explain who Uddhava was and he is in relation to the gopis right at this moment. In the Bhagavata Purana and Brahmavaivata Purana, after Krishna finishes the Samharam of Kamsa, Uddhava came to see him, much to Krishna's delight. Uddhava was not only a great friend and counselor of Krishna, but he was also Krishna's cousin, born to Devabhaga, the brother of Vasudeva. So the affinity of Krishna for him is threefold. Uddhava's physical appearance was very much like Krishna's, occasionally causing confusion in some contexts when people mistake a passing Uddhava to be that of Krishna and vice versa. Such was the semblance. As per Mahabharata, Uddhava was a respected counselor of Rishnis, and the Bhagavata Purana mentions that Uddhava was a disciple of Devaguru Brihaspati as well. Krishna, after the Samharam of Kamsa, requested Uddhava to visit Gokulam with a message from him on his behalf to the gopis and other residents who were missing his company and pining for him. Krishna asked Uddhava to tell the people of Vrindavana to forget him, because only then he will be able to continue his duties. In other words, when gopis and gopikas and gopalakas forget him, Krishna felt that he can complete his duties on earth, and that's how he explains to Uddhava. Uddhava was so filled with the devotion of one particular gopi named Radha, as well as all other gopis, towards Krishna, that he overstayed in Brindavanam for the next 6 months. His intention was to simply go there, deliver the message and return, but he ended up staying there for 6 full months, where he also asked the gopis to be his Acharya or Guru. It's kind of strange because Uddhava himself was such a learned Vedic scholar. The gopis quipped. They told Uddhava, "Hey Uddhava, when Akrura came to us, he took our Krishna with him. And now you are here to take away his memories too from us." To which Uddhava could not respond and he was speechless. The content of this message and the feelings aroused by it, when heard by the cowherds, constitute the highest understanding of love for Paramatman. Uddhava plays a significant role in Bhagavata Purana, being taught the processes of yoga and bhakti directly by Krishna as a prelude to his Gita. The principle of all the discussions is often referred to as Uddhava Gita, as a prelude to the Bhagavad Gita that will be coming after that, wherein Krishna instructs Arjuna. This is the background of Uddhava, which I wanted to give so that we can appreciate the concept as well as why the statement from Tirtha. Krishna explained the entire Vedic system to Uddhava, placing everything in proper order. In fact, Krishna was surprised that Uddhava immaturely thought that he was meant to practice every line item of the scriptures that Krishna taught him, and then also process everything that he did and typically practice it to the T, as if each method were meant simply for him and nobody else. Krishna therefore advises his devotee with a smirk, "Hey, my dear Uddhava, when I told you that analytic knowledge is to be practiced and pious duties are to be performed and devotional service becomes obligatory, yoga procedures must be observed, austerities are to be executed, etc., etc., I was instructing not necessarily you, all living entities using you as my immediate audience. So that which I have spoken, Uddhava, I am speaking now and will speak in the future also, should be understood as guidance for all living entities in different situations, not only in this yuga, but the yuga to come and several other yugas to follow. How could you possibly think that you are meant to practice all of the different Vedic processes? Know this, Uddhava. I accept you as you are now, with all your plus and minus. Since you are my pure devotee, you are not supposed to execute all of these processes. Therefore, just to follow them, because I am just giving these instructions for the rest of the humanity and the creation. Thus, according to Vishwanatha Chakravarti, about whom I have spoken earlier, Bhagavan, with the light-hearted and encouraging words, reveals to Uddhava the deep purpose behind the variety of the Vedic procedures that he indexed Uddhava unto. This is the backdrop of the Bhagavata Slokam, which I quoted a little earlier in the 11th canto, 12th chapter. Sayesha jivo vivara prasutihi pranena goshena guham pravishtaha. Sayesha jivo vivara prasutihi pranena goshena guham pravishtaha. Manomayam sushmamupetya rupam matraswaro varnayati stavishtaha. The Vedas explain these divisions and phenomena somewhat intellectually, but yet in pragmatic form as the sound manifestation of Sarveshwara or Paramatma. That sound has four divisions, which I explained very briefly earlier. Para finds manifestation only in prana. Pashyanti finds manifestation in the mind. Madhyama finds manifestation in the indriyas. And Vaikari finds manifestation in articulate expression. We should remember, articulation is the last and grossest expression of divine sound energy, because the other three are somewhat secretive or latent. Para in prana, Pashyanti in mind, Madhyama in indriyas. So the one that everybody is able to articulate and just visualize and hear is the expression, is Bhagavan's voice only. It is the voice of the Virat Purusha. That's what comes through you and me. It is interesting to learn of the transformation of Vak from Yoga Kundalini Upanishad, which explains this very beautifully. And this particular Upanishad, Yoga Kundalini Upanishad, is attached to Krishna Yajurveda and believed to have been taught to Hanuman by Sri Rama in Ramavataram. Vak vilomena astaga bhavet. That Vak or power of speech which sprouts in Para gives forth two leaves in Pashyanti, buds forth in Madhyama and blossoms in Vaikiri. That Vak which has therefore been described reaches stage of absorption of sound, reversing the above order. In other words, it begins with Vaikiri. The next interesting sloka about Vak from the same book. The meaning of that is, whoever thinks that he who is the great Lord of that Vak, who is the undifferentiated and who is the illuminator of that Vak itself, is self. Whoever thinks over this is never affected by words, high or low, good or bad. If we were to reduce all of the above to the gopis getting mesmerized by the unparalleled magical tunes emanating from the great flute of Krishna and reaching bliss and final beatitude by union with Krishna through Nada, and the venue of such bliss is Brindavanam, because that is where the union between Paramatman and Jivatman was facilitated. No wonder Tirtha compared Brindavana with Brihadaranyaka, creating the realization in the hearts of the detached yogis going through the phases of Para, Pashyanti, Madhyama, effortlessly leading to Vaikari. That's why for Tirtha, Brihadaranyaka is no different than Brindavana. Brindavana was no different than the profound Brihadaranyaka. Tirtha's choice of words in the four stanzas of the Geetam 52 are meant to reiterate the Paramasatyam that what Brindavanam for gopis was Brihadaranyaka to the self-realized yogis in pursuit of Brahman. In other words, for gopis, Brindavanam. All the self-realized yogis in final pursuit of Brahman, Brihadaranyaka. Word by word comparison to the Vedantic interpretation of Brihadaranyaka to Vrindavana is not only possible, but exquisite, showing the literary excellence of Tirtha. Due to the intent to limit such extensive Vedantic digression to bare minimum, only a sample was given for the greatest sentiments evoked by that magical flute, the nada manifesting into the four levels, to the realization by the yogis through Brihadaranyaka through four stages. Madhusudana Saraswati Swamigal, who lived in the 16th century, to be precise, he lived 100 years from 1540 to 1640, was one of the foremost Advaita Vidyacharyas in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. He authored 22 gems of literature on various topics, and one of that was Advaita Rakshanam, in which the great Acharya Saraswati Swamigal writes, Brihadaranya Nivittam Vilutitam Abira Varanaribihi Satya Chidananda Ghanam Brahma Narakaram Alambe. This is what he wrote in Advaita Rakshanam. Swamigal says, I always seek the comfort of company of that exquisite human form of bliss or Brahman, bearing the name of Nanda Kumara, who resides in Brihadaranya, now known as Brindavanam, and who is always surrounded by the doting Gokula Vasis. Vedanta Desika says in Yadava Vidya that the incarnation of the celestial damsels as gopis was the ultimate fruit of their worship. Nakalu Amushyam, Pramadamadandyam, Nakutsanam, Tattat Tabishta Dhatuhu, Nadharma Samsthabana Bhada Gandaha, Nadharma Samsthabana Bhada Gandaha, Shuddha Anuchintyahi Subhasya Leela. Krishna did not play or fool around with gopis as though he was attracted to or attracted by them. This is what Deshika says in Yadava Vidya. What he did was no misconduct on the part of Hari, who is Satyam and Brahman, and he is the Brahma Satyam. Of all, he is in all, and who gives each one the fruit of their respective desire. And hence there was not even a trace of deviation from his role of establishing Dharma. You all remember the Bhagavad Gita Vakyam, which I often quote in the 4th chapter. Ye yatamam prapadyante tam sataiva vajamyaham. Mama vatmanu vartante manushyaha partha sarvasaha. In whatever way people surrender unto me, I reciprocate accordingly. Everyone follows my path, knowingly or unknowingly, O Arjuna, but I reward them certainly in the way they do the Sharanagati to me. That's what Desika highlights in Yadava Vidya. Here the gopis were born because that was their desire to be born amidst Krishna. And their desire was to have a union with him then and there. That's why he said, okay, you will have it. Sri Krishna uses the word bhajami in that Gita Vakyam, which I said now in chapter 4, Shloka 11, Ye tamam prapadyante tam sateva bhajami aham, which means to serve. Bhagavan serves the surrendered souls by destroying their accumulated karmas of endless lifetimes, cutting the bonds of Maya, removing the darkness of material existence, and bestowing divine bliss, divine knowledge, and divine love. And when the devotee learns to love God selflessly, he willingly enslaves himself to their love. This is Bhagavan's promise. Bhagavan willingly enslaves himself to the love of his devotees. In fact, there is a beautiful Vakyam in Valmiki Ramayanam which comes to my mind. Bhagavan said it. The same thing, a similar Vakyam, if not a better statement in Rama Avatara. Rama says or Rama tells Hanuman in Uttarakanda, in Hanumat Rama Samvadam, this is Valmiki Ramayana. Ekaikasya upakarasya pranan dasyami te kape. Sheshasya upakaranam bhavama rishino vayam. And I will do it with another sloka, then the meaning becomes lot more understandable. Madange jirnatam yatu yat tvayopakritam kape naraha pratyupakaranam apastvayati patratam. Rama says, "Oh Hanuman, for a single one of your helpful deeds, my friend, I am here ready to give up my very life." This is Rama to Hanuman. But you have done so many others. What would I do? For all the rest of them, I am forever in your debt. Ekaikasya upakarasya pranan dasyami te kape. நீ பண்ண ஒரு நல்ல காரியத்துக்காகவே என் உயிரை கொடுப்பேனே. சேஷஸ்ய உபகாராணாம் பவாம ரிஷினோவே. How many things you have done to me, Hanuman? If I were to give my life for one upakaram, for all other things which you did, I am eternally in your debt, because that can never, avatara after avatara, avatara after avatara, into eternity I am indebted to you, Hanumane. This is what Rama pleads to him. And in the second slokam he says, Madange jirnatam yatu yat tvayopakritam kape naraha pratyupakaranam apastvayati patratam. Let that runam age with me, my friend Hanuman. Let that debt continue. I don't want to really settle the debt. Only in times of great need does one seek a return of favor. And I don't ever want to place you in a situation of needing to ask me. In other words, he says, so much upakaram you have done, and I have so much debt to repay, will never be able to repay. I can do with my life, but that's not sufficient. For the rest of them, I have to be eternally grateful to you as long as this prapancham is there. But if you are to come to me and saying, Rama, I gave you some great upakaram, you promised me so many things, do it. I don't mind doing whatever is within my capacity, but once I do it, I put you in an awkward situation of having to barter for what good you have done to me. Why did he say that? It is a profound sentiment. If a favor is returned, it is like an account settled. And the parties can walk away as equals. It is a mere transaction, just like the tens of transactions we conduct every day with nary a thought whether the other end is a man or machine. We do something and somebody does it. So we say, Aisa paisa khatam. We have settled it. It is only when a debt is unpayable that a human relationship comes into play. What is more, Rama goes a step further. He does not want Hanuman to be placed in a position where he needs to ask for a return favor. How would a mother feel if a child wanted to pay her back for raising him, expecting that somehow that payment would resolve that relationship? How would she feel if she had to ask the son for something in return for raising him? Rama recognizes that trying to repay Hanuman's selfless love is equally abhorrent, and beautifully resolves it by lowering himself into an eternity of debt, saying, Hanuman, I wanted to be eternally indebted to you because I would not want you to be in a situation to ask for a quid pro quo, because that will put our relationship to the end. That was Rama and Hanuman. Before I close today's session, I'd like to narrate something. I was reminded of a Danish writer and Arctic explorer, Lawrence Peter Frusen, who lived in the 19th century. Of course, he lived between 1886 and 1957. He had written numerous books and he was a journalist. He has 24 works to his credit. He writes in his very first book, which was published in 1927, The book is in, it's in Land Og Folk. In other words, land of folk. How one day after coming home, Peter Fruman was so hungry, he didn't have anything to eat, but he walks into a cold winter night into his tent. He comes after an unsuccessful hunting expedition, walrus hunting expedition. And of course, he returns with other Inuits in Greenland. The entire team that went for hunting came empty-handed. But suddenly found that one of the successful hunters from another camp had visited, and then he was dropping several 100 pounds of walrus meat right in the camp for the benefit of these people who came empty-handed. So, Frushan thanked him profusely, but the man who gave that gift objected to that thank you, and he said indignantly, "Hey, up in our country, we are human. And since we are human, we help each other." The hunter continued, "We don't like to hear anybody say thanks to the other for such essential, necessary deed from one to the other. What I get today, you may get tomorrow. Up here, we say that by gifts, one makes slaves, and by whips, one makes dogs." This is a Inuit saying, which Peter Frushman puts it in his memoir in 1927, the very first book. Up here, we say that by gifts, one makes slaves, and by whips, one makes dogs. Of course, this is an anthropological classic. The moral of the story is, rather than seeing himself as human because he could make economic calculations, the hunter insists that being truly human meant refusing to make such calculations and even be thanked, refusing to measure or remember who had given what and to whom, for the precise reason that doing so would inevitably create a world where we began comparing power with power, measuring one with the other, calculating one action for the other, and reducing each other to slaves or dogs in subsistence through mutual repayment of debt. That's the moral of the story. I don't know whether Peter Frushman read Valmiki Ramayanam and got this to write this story. Desika further says that this Leela of Krishna, who has all the extraordinary Kalyana Gunas, shall have to be contemplated only through pure mind as that of the yogis. Desika also says that the conduct of the gopis should be viewed this way. They have forsaken the path of the worldly dharma and even disobeyed their elders, but it is not to be condemned because they followed the highest dharma, their guide in the path being Bhagavan himself, who taught detachment through Gita later on. As Bhishma said to Yudhishthira in instructing him about dharma, Yeshame sarva dharmanam dharmo adhikatamo mataha. Yeshame sarva dharmanam dharmo adhikatamo mataha. Yad bhaktya pundari kaksham savairarchen narasada. This is the 14th slokam in Vishnu Sahasranama. The greatest dharma, as Bhishma narrates Yudhishthira, is the devotion to Bhagavan, weighed against which all the worldly dharma comes to nothing. We get the example of Vandal, Meera, Sakubai, and many other women in history. All these women saints, even in Kali Yuga, to prove this or demonstrate this. It is the Saulabhyam, Sausilyam, and Vatsalyam of Bhagavan Krishna that even while the Maharishis and Mahayogis attempted, they had to only struggle to get that pure devotion. Whereas the simple gopis and the Dikshita Patnis running to Krishna to provide food to Krishna's friends, they were blessed with para bhakti because they came with no expectation whatsoever except their love for Krishna, which is different from para bhakti, as it is wrongly understood by the uninitiated. People think para bhakti and para bhakti are one and the same. But what is para bhakti was demonstrated by the gopis and the Dikshita Patnis. Krishna himself very clearly clarifies this distinction. In the 18th chapter, Brahmabhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. Samassarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labate param. Labate param. Samassarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labate param. A person that is situated in realization of Brahman becomes fully joyful. He neither laments nor hankers for anything. Being equally disposed to all beings, that person attains my pure bhakti, which is blessed with the symptoms of prema. That's what Krishna said to Arjuna, Brahmabhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. Before we go to Rasa Leela, we should remember that Sukha said to Parikshit that Krishna played with the gopis as a child plays with his own reflection. Krishna was the Brahman who is inside not only the gopis, but also their husbands, and it was the play of the self with the bodies it occupies. Moreover, the gopis saw Krishna everywhere. Thereby, they also saw Krishna in their husbands, the mothers, fathers, and children, and hence their love for their husbands only grew, did not diminish. The husbands also never missed their wives from their side because Bhagavan created that Maya. I talked to you about the Yoga Shariram and Bhoga Shariram. Above all, it should be remembered that Krishna was only 10 years at the time of Rasa Leela. The joy experienced by the gopis in the company of Krishna is described by Deshika in the final part of that chapter. Abhinna Vahyantaram Ekarasyat Amodam Anyonya Sagandam Apuhu. Krishna gave them flowers picked by him, and their happiness was equally experienced both inside and outside. The Bahya or external joy was due to Krishna doing things to please each one of those gopis, and the internal joy is because they enjoyed his presence in their heart, completely overwhelming them. Krishna acknowledges their dedication, but advises them to go back to their homes for their duties. That's going to be the next session. You will see he is teaching them an advanced Gita before Rasa Leela. We will see how Tirtha and others address this Krishna Gopi Samvadam in the coming session.
Narayana 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 Hare Krishna Thiruvaiyaru